G'day, I'm Alex Bainbridge. Welcome to the Green Left Show. In this episode, we're talking about what the recent Pacific Islands Forum revealed about Australia's imperialist role in the Pacific. This includes the hot mic exposure, where Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was caught joking with the United States representative about Australia's attempts to meddle with the policing in the Pacific. Also, it deals with the AUKUS imperialist alliance, the attempt for a nuclear-free and independent Pacific, the role of China, and more. Before we get underway, I do want to acknowledge that this show is recorded on stolen Aboriginal land, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Also, if you like the work that we do, please become a Green Left supporter. It is the #1 way to both support our work and also to receive the content that we produce. Plans start from just $5 a month. You can find out more information on the Green Left website at the link below or in this description. Our guest today is Epeli Lesuma, who is a nuclear justice campaigner with the Fiji-based Pacific Network on Globalisation. Epeli attended the recent Pacific Islands Forum Summit in Tonga. This guest interview was conducted by Peter Boyle, and Peter began by asking about the hot mic exposure where Albanese was caught trying to interfere in the Pacific policing.
There was this latest embarrassing hot mic situation at the forum in Tonga that caught Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and US Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell joking about the deal that was done for, I think, a Pacific policing deal with Australia. But it seemed to me that no one watching that or listening to that could fail to notice that the attitude was that of, US and its deputy sheriff in what they considered to be the sort of colonial or neo-colonial backyard. What was the feeling, among, Pacific Islander people and activists who saw this?
Thank you, Peter. I think it's interesting. I had conversations with a few people in Tonga in the 2 weeks that I was there. They all remarked, with maybe a little bit of surprise, that the Australian delegation, essentially DFAT, was the largest delegation to come to Tonga. I think almost over 70 people. And Pacific Islanders, as we sometimes do, to make light of what is a serious, I suppose you could call, jostling for geopolitical space, all joked about the fact that the Australians sent a big delegation to try and outnumber what was probably going to be a big Chinese delegation. The forum looked like a really crowded space. So many people from, I guess, outside of what we would see as the family seem to be flooded into this particular forum. And in this particular instance, a comment like this sort of reinforces that there's a member of the family that almost has someone with a stick over their head, ready to like smack them and get that person of the family, Australia, to get us all into line and in alignment with what they think and see as a free and fair, what they're calling us now, Indo-Pacific.
So, I mean, specifically, this new deal, which is somehow, I understand, connects both security and climate change, is going to be an increase of Australian involvement in the police forces of various Pacific Island states. Now, Vanuatu, I believe, has said that this was, I think it's pretty obvious, a move of strategic denial towards China. Now, is there a real problem with China, using its power in the Pacific?
I don't think it's as much of a problem as people would initially think and see. Because if you're talking to a Tongan, or if you're talking to someone from Fiji, what the Australians and the Americans claim the Chinese are doing is exactly what they're doing as well. And so for Pacific people, the challenge for us then becomes, well, who can I get the most out of to benefit my people? The conversations in Tonga were interesting because you had folk that felt that China was the enemy and that Australia and New Zealand is their friend. And then you had the other side of the spectrum where people said, well, actually, China's our friend. The US opened an embassy in Nuku'alofa, and yet we still have to travel all the way to Suva to get our visas approved. If America really was our friend, America would allow Tongans to get their visas sorted in Tonga with minimal cost to them as Tongans. If you're to drive around Nuku'alofa, you will see that there are little plaques at the entrances of some villages. If you were to drive around Tongatapu, the island, little plaques at the entrances of villages where Chinese provinces or cities or communities have adopted a Tongan village and they've built footpaths, contributed to halls. It's not necessary. You don't necessarily see a kangaroo in front of a village for the same thing. So, those sorts of things come into play. Tonga is now blessed with a beautiful state-of-the-art indoor stadium where they will hopefully be able to host large meetings and premier sporting events built by the Chinese, not the Australians. And so, it was interesting having these conversations because, yes, while people have a lot of family and friends that live in Australia and New Zealand, and similarly in the United States, it's China that seems to be coming through for them in instances like this.
Now, this latest hot mic situation can't help but remind us of another hot mic situation 8 years ago when then Australia's Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton were caught joking about climate change and the Pacific, about waters lapping at the door. Now, I understand in this forum, one of Australia's other major objectives was to get Pacific support for the COP31 summit, climate summit, to be hosted in Australia, like on behalf of the Pacific Islanders. But I understand that there were a few careful but strong words, particularly from President Hilda Hine from Marshall Islands, about
Yes.
What's Australia really doing about the climate and its impact on the Pacific. Can you reflect on that?
I think one of the messages that seemed to come out, perhaps not as overtly, in particular from the UN Secretary General, if I remember correctly, perhaps in his opening speech at the forum and at a press conference I think I attended, without actually saying Australia, you need to do a little bit better in terms of minimizing things like coal and fossil fuel exploration and all of that. The message was, well, the view is, I guess, you can't host COP and label it, rubber stamp it as a Pacific COP if you, as the Australian government, are not prepared to translate that into action in country, truly standing with Pacific Islanders and Pacific states to say, well, climate change really is the greatest threat to our Blue Pacific region. And in solidarity with the Pacific, we need to take a firm stance against fossil fuel exploration, coal, gas, whatever you name it. Those, translating the support for COP into those sorts of actions never really materialized. I think, when I think about Australia wanting to host COP, I think it is 31, they can't just use the Pacific, put on a couple of flowers, wear a couple of leis and bula shirts or aloha shirts and think, welcome to the Pacific, if they aren't able to make some hard decisions, some morally courageous decisions to stand with Pacific Islanders and push back and halt any expansion of fossil fuel exploration and use. New Zealand's Prime Minister, I think in a news article I read while in Tonga, was something around they were going to be lifting the ban on oil and gas exploration in New Zealand waters, a ban that had been put in by the Labour government of Jacinda Ardern previously. If New Zealand and Australia really want to be family and friends of the Pacific, they need to stand in solidarity with us to put their words into action and to take a moral stance against what is the real security threat for Pacific Island people and Pacific Island states, and that's the climate crisis.
Now, speaking of security threats, what is the thinking particularly among Pacific activists and people who are committed to the idea of a nuclear-free Pacific? What is their thinking about Australia's deal to get nuclear-powered submarines from the US and Britain in the AUKUS deal? Is this seen as a pushback against the dream of a nuclear-free Pacific?
Oh, definitely. It is a pushback. It's a slap in the face. We have a treaty, the Treaty of Rarotonga, that is in place. And it is one that Australia is a signatory to. It shouldn't even be a question of, well, maybe we can bring, you don't have to know about it. No, it's pretty much set in stone. This treaty was birthed out of the trauma legacy of testing and dumping by Britain, France, and the United States in the Pacific, in Kiribati, Marshall Islands, and Maui Nui. It's not, and so the Treaty of Rarotonga comes from a place where we would never ever want to see our Pacific Islands used as a highway, a waterway, I should say, for nuclear weapons, nuclear-powered submarines of any kind. It's just wrong. France's last tests in the Pacific were in 1996. I was a 3-year-old then. That's crazy to think that there's many young people like myself who were already alive and born when the last nuclear tests were done in our Pacific, our sacred blue Pacific Ocean. And Australia's sneaky AUKUS deal, it makes you question, are they really Vuvale? Vuvale in Fijian means family, and it's the name used to frame the bilateral arrangement that Fiji has with Australia. Vuvale for Fijians, family, it's a word that runs really deep, and it would be a similar meaning for many Pacific people. Australia's actions totally go against the values and the deep meaning of what it means to be a real family. So yeah, it's a slap in the face, Peter. I don't think our leaders came out as strongly as they could have and should have around certain nuclear issues that exist. We acknowledge that larger countries like Australia and the United States provide us with a lot of aid money, but it shouldn't mean that Pacific Island states should necessarily let them off the hook so easily. I think, if I recall correctly, the communique from the PIF's leaders meeting had only one line about the Treaty of Rarotonga, that they noted the update from the Secretary General. My memory may be incorrect, but I think there was a brief mention of AUKUS, that they noted the update provided by Australia. It's not good enough just to note these things. Pacific leaders need to be a bit firmer. I don't even recall seeing Fukushima nuclear wastewater dumping in the communique. So it's disappointing. But what it also means, it creates for us, as civil society, the opportunity to work just a little bit harder to hold our leaders to account. And it means we got to put in a bit more of a hard yard going into the 54th PIFS leaders meeting in the Solomon Islands next year to ensure that issues around nuclear legacy issues and emerging nuclear threats remains at the top of the agenda, to ensure that the aspirations for a nuclear-free and independent Pacific for states like Kanaky, New Caledonia, West Papua, and Mahine remain true as it was in the 80s and the 70s during this movement, as it should be in 2024.
Yeah, and just specifically on the Kanaky situation, was there, like around the forum, any indication of, how important this is to the rest of the Pacific family? And what do you think is the sentiment in the Pacific on this issue?
Sure. I think, so I can speak to civil society because there was a although perhaps it wasn't as maybe visible in the media coverage from Nuku'alofa, there was a civil society village. And on the Wednesday of the forum, we had a whole discussion on Kanaky and self-determination of other countries, West Papua included. The sentiment among civil society was united. We as Pacific people need to be able to be a stronger voice for brothers and sisters in the Pacific that are still agitating for their own self-determination. And I think it was meaningful that this conversation was taking place in Tonga, a state, a country that proudly declares that they have never been colonized. And so for us and for my colleagues coming in from the region into Tonga, it was an opportunity for us to remind them, just as Tonga has been free for thousands of years, we share with you this message so that you may be stronger voices to push for Kanaky and West Papua and their efforts for self-determination, because you've lived and breathed independence your entire lives. We need to be able to see this for our brothers and sisters around the region as well.
Thanks very much for joining us. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Green Left Show. Thank you to Peter Boyle for conducting the interview. Thanks to Epeli Lesuma for his insights on this matter. As I said at the beginning, if you like the work that we do, please do become a Green Left supporter if you're not already. It is the number one way to support our work and also to receive the content that we produce. However, even without spending a single cent, you can help us out by sharing this video or podcast, giving it a thumbs up or a 5-star review, leaving comments to help the algorithm, and also check out more about our work at the Green Left website, greenleft.org.au. We'll see you next time on the Green Left Show.